All right, good morning, guys. Happy Friday. As you can tell, we do have some updates to some of the forms. There's nothing really dramatic about the changes. There's some additions, there's some changes. So the pack you have here live, it doesn't have all of the forms full. It's just sections that there's actual changes. So, so I'm going to go over some of the but just the changes, but also parts that where there's other parts of the form where I want to point out something. I'll go over that too. So this first one is the residential listing agreement. So here live, you have the packet with the red colors indicating that there's a change. So if you look up here at the very top, it says that car form RLA revised 12 of 24. So that's the update made as of December. So we have them now available in zip form. Just whenever you do go on the zip form, just make sure you do have the updated form. I've seen cases where they do update the forms and it automatically changes all of them in your transactions. But I've seen cases where it still has the old one. So just whenever you're looking at the form, just make sure you have the most updated one. So here's the first page of the residential listing agreement here on the first page. The first change you're going to see is on C1 where it says broker created compensation schedule. So that section itself, what it's saying, and I'm still getting questions about it, just apart from the change, just basically what it was and what it is now, the compensation to seller's broker. So this section right here, all you're doing here is saying what you are expecting as compensation from the seller to the brokerage. And what we're going to put here is not 6% or 5%. That's not the total gross commission. That's not what we're putting here. What we're putting here is only the compensation that you as a listing agent under your listing brokerage are putting or are charging the seller. So all you're going to do here is 3%. So we've gone over this before in past trainings and past meetings, but I just want to make it really clear because I think there's still some confusion about what that actually is. So again, what you're going to put here is either 3%, or if the seller is insisting that you go down to 2.5%, that's what you're going to put here. That is only the seller side commission. And the only change here, they just changed some wording. It's nothing really important or anything over the top. All it says is that see attached broker created compensation schedule. So as a company, we don't have that. And what that would mean is that there's some more intricate, you're going to pay this if this happens, or if you're going to pay that. It's something different if this happens. We don't have that yet, but that's not really a big change. And all they added here is if the broker represents both buyer and seller, the buyer side compensation shall be specified in a separate written agreement between the buyer and broker. That's referring to the BRBC. So just in case you as a listing agent find the buyer, then it's referring to the BRBC, the contract that you had with your buyer, which we have to have, right? So we've all been using it. We've all had to have been using it since, what was it, August? We have to have that. So, as soon as you meet a buyer, as soon as you start showing them any property, even if you're emailing them properties from the MLS, we have to be in a contract with them. That means any agreement with a buyer that has any type of compensation and agency. So the contract has the agency agreement. So we have to have that with them. So don't forget that. Morning. So those aren't major changes. So what they did add right down here, E2. So again, all the changes in that packet are in red. So publication of seller's willingness to consider concessions. So that's one of those new things that came up on the MLS where now they have a field where it says, is your seller willing to give concessions to any buyer? that comes up. So that's set right then and there on the MLS. So that's now another entry. So it says if check below, one, seller authorizes broker to market that seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions. So right here, right on E2 at the bottom of your first page, and no amount of possible concession will be stated in such marketing unless the seller notifies the broker in writing of an amount. I mean, you can or cannot, or you might or might not put an actual amount, but all this is saying is that this is answering the question that's on the MLS. And what it's saying is the seller willing to do any concessions? But what's a concession? Is it closing costs? Is it a home warranty? Is it a commission for the buyer's agent, or I'd rather say compensation to the buyer's agent? Well, it could be any of them. It's not supposed to be a compensation for the buyer broker, but there is an explanation further down here on one of the updates to the other forms. So that's just one of the sections here on the RLA that answers a question that the MLS requires. And what are they going to check? Well, the first empty box here in the MLS listed above, if permitted by that MLS, in any other marketing outside the MLS, which could be, our company website, which we're not putting commissions on there just yet.
Realtor.com, stuff like that, is that what that means?
Yeah, any other
So
outside.
would you check those, or would you just leave them blank?
I would just stick to the MLS if they want it. It's not something that's where you have to put it on there, but it's something you have to ask the seller. This is you have here the rest of the listing agreement. All it does is, if you see here in red, it's just referencing new sections. The seller opt out. That's not really a big deal. It's pretty self-explanatory. So there's not really much apart from the very end. Well, here. So this is a new section. This is where it actually explains the seller concessions. So you're asking your seller, okay, well, you're asking me here on the bottom of page 1 if I'm willing to give the seller any concessions, but what are concessions? Well, skip down here to page 5 of 7. We have this new section saying seller concessions. So what are seller concessions? Well, now you have something to go off on to explain to your seller, well, here's what I mean by seller concessions. Any monetary payments that the seller may contribute to the buyer's expenses or cost of the buyer is responsible for a transaction. Concessions that may include, but not limited to, any closing costs or costs of title, lender fees, repairs. Any broker compensation. So it does reference broker compensation here. So it's just telling the seller, okay, well, the buyer may ask for something at some point in the transaction. And one of the biggest ones might be broker compensation right over here. So, but what do we know in reality? They're going to ask for broker compensation. I mean, a buyer's agent is not going to work for free. And the buyer already signed a contract with that agent that they're going to have to pay that agent. But what do we know in reality? The buyer going to have cash for the agent? No. I mean, they have their down payment. They have all this stuff, all the closing costs. I have seen cases where the buyer did pay the buyer's agent here at our company, but it's in reality, we can't expect that. So we have to prepare a seller in advance that the buyer has to pay their agent, just like a lawyer, a doc, whatever it is. But in this industry, it's not common for the buyer to pay commission. So now the seller is going to be asked to cover that cost. So we're just preparing the seller that the seller will be asked to pay some kind of concession, something towards the buyer or whatever else. Concessions identified in the MLS listing are not promises to pay, but instead indicate a seller that the seller may consider it. So just prepare your seller that yeah, there's a seller concession thing here, but you're not committed to anything right now. We're just saying, okay, depending on what it is, I might pay towards that concession. I might pay towards that cost. But your seller's asking, well, what am I going to pay? Well, we don't know. That's up to negotiation between the buyer, between you, the seller, and the buyer when the time comes. So the seller is not tied to anything. The seller is not committing to anything at this point. So I think that's a really good addition to this contract. Just the seller concessions, explaining what the concessions are, and the fact that they may be asked, but there is no commitment right now, seller. And the reason you're seeing like these numbers in red are because they added this one and it kind of shifted all the numbers. So don't think that 12 is new, 11 is new. They're not new. It's just the number that was shifted because they added this one. So if you see before that, these are still 8 and 9. They're black. So yeah, don't think that these are new. If you're already familiar with these, they haven't changed. They're not new. So again, we're looking at the listing contract. The very basic thing you need to sign with a seller to list a property on the MLS. Seller concessions. So on page 7 of 7, you're going to see like a big paragraph that's in red. So you're thinking, okay, well, this is something brand new. Well, not really new. It's just something that they expanded just to make everything clear. So what is this part on the top of page 7? This is the entity sellers. So if your client, your seller client is an individual, but they're selling a property as an LLC, some kind of corporation, or more commonly a trust, a family trust, then they're going to have to enter something here. The full name of the trust, basically the name of the entity that's owning the property. Then on 4, who is authorized to sign. So that's something you want to know, right? Whenever you list a property or on an appointment with a seller, a possible seller, you want to know who is actually appointed or authorized to sign in order to sell that property. So the LLC articles of incorporation, those will have the names. The family trust, those will have the names, and then just fill them out here. This person and that person are authorized and are required to sign for the sale. So you just have it here.
It's legal authorization to assign that you can most likely find if you do a title search.
Yeah, you might be able to find a title search. But you know what? Sometimes you have a seller and they don't have those documents. So that might take some work to find.
You need a copy of the trust.
Yeah, we do. So yeah, so whenever you have a property and you look in the tax documents or the tax records and it shows that it's Smith Family Trust. So now you have something to go on, a question to ask, do you have those trust documents showing who has the authority to sign that? So that's the listing contract. No big changes. You have a blank page here. Don't worry about that. So the next one is the purchase contract. So now we're going into escrow. We have a buyer and the seller, they accepted. So now we have a contract here. I'm not going to go over the whole contract. That's a different training. No like dramatic changes right here on D2. All you're seeing is the increased deposit addendum. It's referencing that here. So and always check that whenever you're looking for a buyer or looking at the MLS for a buyer, just check on the MLS. It's probably in the agent remarks saying the buyer for this property needs to have more than usual for a deposit, 1%, $5,000, $10,000. So always check that. And maybe the buyer wants to do an increased deposit at a later date. So they may want to put more money in to this escrow up front just to be more serious about it. So they can do that. That's not a big change. That's always been the case, but they just added that. So it's nothing too much to worry about. So here's another change. So that's one of the changes, the big changes that happened here. So I went over this really briefly during the sales meeting on Tuesday, G3. So this has been a big touching point over the past, I guess, almost year now, about the seller payment of buyer's obligation to compensate buyer's broker. So what this is saying, so the big shift for those that are new here, it used to be that the seller automatically agreed, we're going to pay a buyer's broker because they're doing the job. They brought a buyer, they found a buyer. Now we're going to compensate them for that work. But now the seller isn't doing that. Now the regulation is the buyer has to pay their own agent. That's the big change. So now it's now up to the buyer to ask the seller to cover that cost, just like any other cost. Hey, seller, help me out with the home warranty. Help me out with these repairs. Help me out with, I guess, whatever else, closing costs, whatever. So now we have to ask the seller for that. There used to be another form called the SPBB, which is now obsolete. They got rid of it just to make things simpler. And when they get rid of forms to make things simpler, I'm all for it. I have to read all these forms. I have to know them. So now here's the change. So now we have to check off that box. And on the left here, this other red section, seller agrees to pay out of the proceeds of this transaction, whatever percentage of the final price, towards the obligation of buyer to compensate broker. So that buyer broker contract that's now required, we are required to have as a buyer's agent, we're required to have a contract with a buyer saying the buyer's going to pay us. But we know the buyer probably won't have the cash for it. They weren't expecting that when they found an agent. So now the buyer is asking the seller to cover that cost. So whatever percentage is in that buyer contract, we put here. So what's going to go here? Probably 3%, maybe 2%. But it can't be higher than what was on the original contract you had with your buyer. So you're not going to be able to get paid more than what your buyer originally did. So basically, if you want to make notes on the side, this number cannot be higher than what was on the BRBC. So we can't forget this part. This part determines whether or not you're getting paid, just to put it simply.
But if you do put the 3% and the seller is only going to pay 2%, then that's considered a negotiation.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Yeah, so the question here was, what if you put something here and then the buyer said, oh, sorry, the seller says, no, I'm not going to pay for that, or I'm not going to pay everything for that. So now it's going to be in a counteroffer. So before, commissions were never on counteroffers. Now they have to be. So we're going to counter back and forth. You're going to counter home warranties. You're going to counter price. You're going to counter everything else. Now you're going to counter compensation. So yeah. So what? Yeah, it's going to get tricky. If the only thing being negotiated is commission or compensation, then yeah, you're going to have to talk with your client that, you know what, we had in our original agreement that you, the buyer, were going to pay me 3%, but the seller is now saying they're only going to pay 2%. So where is that extra 1% difference going to come from? Well, it's going to have to come from the buyer. That's not going to be, easy for the buyer, but yeah, so it's going to have to come from somewhere.
But is that agent one actually make them, if they know they can't pay that 1%, they can give that 1% up, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can just say, you know what, I'm going to work for only
whatever.
Yeah, that's gonna be a case by case basis, just, yeah, just that. Yeah, ask your manager or the brokers. But, that's gonna have to happen. Um, so again, the compensation is gonna be different than what's up here. Additional seller credit terms does not include buyer broker compensation. So what the seller is contributing to is either the buyer broker compensation or up here for closing costs. Closing costs could be the any of the fees that the escrow has, but those are different from that. So there's a really fine distinction here. So mostly escrow fees, closing costs, those are up here. And those are typically historically been like 2%, maybe higher. But they are different. The rest of the contract hasn't changed. I mean, there's some new stuff like references to other forms, the TOPA. So if the property has somebody living in there while it's closing, then all it's talking about here on M3 is, okay, are they going to stay here or are they going to move out? Because we have to agree on that. Whether it's tenants or any adults other than the sellers, there's the TOPA. So we'll do a training on that another time. We've done it before, but that's just saying the terms for that are here in the contract if there is no separate form. So again, just tenant stuff, it's just covered here. And here it just breaks down what the compensation is. So this is an agreement between you and your buyer initially before the seller accepts. Now we have to explain to the buyer, okay, well, when am I going to get paid? The timing. So I'm here at the bottom of page 11. So I just skipped around the contract. Bottom of page 11, timing of broker compensation. It is specified in a separate agreement. So we have another agreement saying that the seller is going to pay the seller's agent. They have their listing contract, and here we have saying that we're going to get paid compensation. So compensation is payable upon close of escrow, or if escrow does not close, as otherwise specified in the agreement between buyer broker and that seller or buyer. That doesn't happen too often where we don't close escrow, but we still get paid. But there might be some unusual case. But really, you get paid when you get to close of escrow. Buyer representation, seller payment to compensate buyer's broker. So that's what the big change is. So we already went over that, where we're asking the seller to compensate the buyer's broker, and then that commission is over there in the second page of the RPA. So that wording really was already in the broker compensation advisory, which is attached to this contract. But they just added a few more, some more verbiage, which they just wanted to make clear. That they have some here in 19 escrow instructions and paragraphs. They're just highlighting this stuff. It's really more of a label than anything. It's not really a change. The compensation disclosure, D2, escrow holder shall provide a buyer a closing statement, which, I mean, we already know, right? They're just making it just more clear. A lot of this stuff, really, it's just more for disclosure or advisory. It's not really anything dramatic. Going down here. So just like with the listing contract, right down here on the page 15 of 17, they added the same thing as the listing contract, where it's just specifying that who is the authorized signer for whatever entity we list here. So full entity name, it's right down here. And sometimes, and I got a question about this, like, I think like 2 weeks ago. Well, there's a big trust name that doesn't even fit where the buyer's thing is printed. Just put as much as you can. But this part will actually let you type in the whole thing. Like some of these are long, like Smith Family Trust and whatever date and yeah, that they're or um beneficiary of the trust and like a huge date. They can get pretty long, so and they're not going to fit here. So that's a chance to put the full name. So you have two really big lines. So you have a better chance there.
That where you put, the full name, and then you note that the signee is gonna sign the documents a certain way.
Yeah, that's what that is. So the assign well, assignee is a very specific term, so we don't want to use that. But the authorized signers, yeah, are right here. Here are the two names. So I kind of don't want to use the word assignee because assignee means you're adding somebody to the contract or you're changing the buyer. That's completely different than clarifying who the authorized signers are.
Should that? No
Yeah.
surprise.
Yeah, signee, we can do a different training on that. That's just a 2-page form. Yeah, if you want to, if you're in the middle of escrow, in the middle of a deal, you want to add a buyer, yeah, that's an assignee. You're adding a buyer. And again, did I put the same page? Okay, so this is entity buyers. This is for entity sellers. So for both parties, we're clarifying who the authorized signers are. So they added these just to clear things up. So when the buyer makes an offer, they're saying, here are the authorized signers. And now down here, if whether or not the seller accepts it, which I mean that by either a seller counteroffer or a backup offer, the seller has to disclose who the authorized signers are. So that's what's going on here. So both buyer and sellers, we're just saying, okay, here's our corporation name, but just so you know, Kevin Lopez is the actual signer that's going to physically, or not physically, but that's how it's going to say when I'm signing, it won't say ABC Corporation. It's going to be written out as whether you're physically signing or digitally signing, it's going to say Kevin Lopez right down here. And my title, it's probably CEO or trustee or whatever. So that's the the only real changes to the RPA. Now you got a blank page here. But what if they're not accepting it, but counteroffering? So the seller counteroffer had a minor change right at the bottom. So seller counteroffer, you know, the buyer submits an offer, the seller likes some of the terms, but they want to change something. So now the seller signs a seller counteroffer, number one, to propose some change. I want $10,000 more. They can write that. But what I'm going to go over is right here at the bottom. So 4 says, well, seller makes this counteroffer on terms above and acknowledges receipt without copy. So they're agreeing to that. By making this counteroffer, any previous offer or counteroffers can no longer be accepted. So it says right here, this in red. So that's a change. This counter offer is valid regardless of whether any previous offer or counteroffer is accepted by its terms. So what it's really saying is that the buyer makes an offer, the seller accepts that offer, that offer, right? Subject to this. So the buyer can't say, hey, you signed this whole offer initially with that price. That's what it is, right? Well, no, it's subject to this change. So it's just making the clarification that if this is a counteroffer, then whatever came before that, the original offer, it's still valid, but it's subject to this. So we changed something here. That's what it's saying. So we can't just say, well, you signed the original counteroffer or the original offer. Why can't we accept that? No, we made a change. And late acceptance. So they added this part. So the buyer can accept this counteroffer. But what it's saying is late acceptance. If the date of the buyer's signature in paragraph 5, so whenever the buyer signs this, is after the expiration of paragraph 2A. So this expiration, so the seller can give the buyer a counteroffer, but it's but there's a timeline. It can expire 5 p.m. on the third day after this seller counteroffer. So the buyer can just ignore this counteroffer and just say, okay, I'm just going to go on to another property. I'm not going to deal with this. So buyer's acceptance is only binding if seller agrees to late acceptance by signing below before 5 p.m. on the third day after this. So the seller can still accept that even after it expires because there's a timeline here. So it's really more of a clarification that the seller can still agree to that counteroffer. So yeah, there's not a big change there. It's just clarifying that, yeah, there could be acceptance after the expiration. So the seller property questionnaire, this is one of the required documents that we have. So one of the disclosures where they just say yes or no to, did the seller die on the property within the last 3 years? Is it, were there any illegal controlled substances on or beneath the property? So yes or no on all of these. So the yeses or nos is only whether or not the seller is aware of it. The no basically means either no or I don't know. So whenever you see like another one is a TDS, the transfer disclosure statement, which is one of the most important ones that are required. Yes or no is what the seller knows about the property. All these questions. If the seller doesn't know, then they just click no. One thing they added here is, so this is one of the new things for this year. Are there any inspections, reports, or any exterior balconies, stairways, or other elevated elements on buildings with 3 or more units built within the past 6 to 9 years? So there's this new, well, it's not really new. It's been here for a while, but the requirement is for this year, the WBSA, and we'll take a look at that here in a few minutes. So the WBSA covers that new requirement for there has to be an inspection for any of those balconies outside of a building with 3 or more units. So that's going to be required coming here on out. So I'll go more into detail when we get to the end. Here on the next page, 204. So there's a new question here under the disaster relief insurance or civil settlement, 9B. Receiving domestic water storage tank assistance pursuant to that code of the water code, whether real properties are received such assistance or currently domestic storage tank. So it just has to do with the water storage. I mean, the seller should know, but again, it's whether or not they know about it. But it's just another question. It's not really anything crazy, but it's just a new question on there.
And that would be if the seller is like a child or a relative that hasn't even seen the property, then you would put no on that because they wouldn't know anything.
Yeah. So basically,
Yeah.
basically what you're asking is if the seller hasn't been in the property in years and it's a rental, or if the seller was a relative of a deceased owner and they're representing like some kind of a trust transaction, then they just don't know. I don't know. It's a no. It says, are you, the seller, aware of? It doesn't say definitively, is this the case? No, it doesn't say that. Are you, the seller, just aware of it? Then it would be no. So the SPQ, that's the only real change. So here's a WBSA. That's the new requirement. So balconies, exterior stairways, and other elevated elements. They added right here on paragraph 2. So the requirement to deliver reports to buyers. Seller shall, within the time specified in 3N1, which is 7 days, deliver to buyer an inspection report of the elevated elements prepared within the preceding 6 years, showing that they're in proper working condition and do not pose a threat to health or safety. But what they added right here on Roman numeral 3, if the report shows that any portion of the elevated property are in need of repairs or such repairs have not been made, a statement that the repairs have not been made up until January 1st, 2026. So there does have to be a report, and they're probably going to be I'm not sure if there's going to be an actual specified requirement to do those inspections. It might be a cottage industry that'll show up, or just general contractors, but there has to be some kind of report from here on out. Authorized inspectors for common interest developments, licensed structural engineers, licensed architects, licensed civil engineers. So, yeah, it's going to be issued by the contractor's state license board, so general contractors. So that's just showing the requirements. So the multiple listing service addendum. So this one is already automatically added to your listing contract. So this isn't a form so this is required, but it's not a form that you're going to actively have to look up. It's already included with your listing contract. So when you're going on your listing appointment, this will already be in that contract. So MLSA. Basically, they took out some of the verbiage in the listing contract from before, and they put it on here just to kind of distinguish it from the listing contract. Just tells you what the MLS is, something we already know, that you already should know how to explain. The only thing they added is the impact of opting out of the MLS. So what they added is the scope of marketing will consist only of direct one-on-one promotion between brokers and licensees affiliated with the listing brokerage and their respective clients. Basically, well, it's just saying that the public doesn't have access to the MLS. So our clients, we're going to have to give that information to our clients. There's some things in the MLS that the buyers or our clients want to have access to, which has already been the case. But clear cooperation policy. What the clear cooperation policy is, it's something that our MLS has adopted from the National Association of Realtors, which is saying that if you're going to have a property listed and you have a listing contract, you're required to market that property within 1 day of it being on the MLS. So that's been the case for years. So what it's really doing, this part, it's just clarifying as to why this 1 day requirement. So what it's saying is this, what it added, this is because the MLSs have adopted a clear cooperation policy of the National Association of Realtors. This policy seeks to maximize the seller profits by highlighting the importance of advertising the list of properties in forms that are ultimately visible to the public. So and the reason they do that is, okay, we're going to market your property. So I encourage you to allow us to publicly market it, because the sellers do have an option of keeping it off the MLS, which is now part of, actually no, the change that I'm going to, I don't think I put it on here. No, it isn't here. Okay. Yeah, that's the next part. So the top of the next page is something that they took out of a form that's now obsolete. So if those have been in the business for a while, you remember the SELM form, the form that says what's called the seller exclusion of listing from the multiple listing service. So that form is gone. What they did is they took that verbiage and put it onto here, which is attached to the RLA. So now this part was taken from that form and they just popped it on here. And what that part does, it says the seller is choosing to exclude the property from being on the MLS. Rather, we're going to begin the marketing, even though we already have a signed contract with the seller and it's technically for sale. We're not going to put it on the market publicly until whatever date is on here, or not market the property to the public for the whole listing period, which doesn't help the seller. So there's no more SCLM if the seller does not want the property on the market, be it for repairs or there's tenants that they want to get out. That's where you do it, D. So now it's part of the contract package, which is good, right? The less forms, the better, but then they take out one form and then they add like 5 more. Yeah. Yeah, every 6 months, something's gonna happen. That's those are the only changes I have. The one thing to remember is the on the RPA, just remember the BRBC whenever we're showing property. Preferably meet them at your office, have them in person, have a maybe even a paper copy of the BRBC, just to explain we have to have this form signed. Not because I want to, but because we're required to show that how you get compensated, what I'm going to do for you. And then you're just saying, well, you're going to be tied to me for 3 months. So as a reminder, if I still have it, I'm not going to do all that. But as a reminder, just get either the BRBC or the PSRA. Those 2 forms are the basic legal requirement to show to represent your clients, to show your properties. So let me see, I still got time, so I'm going to show it really quick. So when you meet a client, you're prospecting, you're making phone calls, what are you going to do? You're going to ask them, are you looking, you go to the basic Mike Ferry training script for real estate. You're going to go through all that. If they're buyers, you're going to, ask them to come into the office. You're going to ask them the basic questions. So our company has a script, well, really a list of questions that cover basically all their needs and wants. And you're qualifying your client. When I say qualifying your client, you're asking, well, what's your price range? What area you're looking in? Do you need to sell something before you buy something? So really basic questions. If anybody wants it, I can send it out to you. Buyers, needs, and wants. It's a basic script that if you're going to work with buyers, it's going to help you out a lot. Let me see. Yeah, you two will get them. BR. So again, the 2 are the BRBC. So there's a reminder to everybody, if you've haven't been active in a while, just in case, the BRBC, buyer broker compensation agreement. So you're setting out that the buyer will pay you a certain percentage if we close. But as you saw earlier, that can be negotiated to where the seller pays for that instead. That's a basic form. It's good for 3 months, but it's a little bit long. Maybe the buyer is intimidated. Why do I have to sign something? Why do I have to agree to pay you 3%? I'm barely going to make the down payment. Why am I going to do that? But again, you explain, this can be negotiated between the seller and you, the buyer. If they don't want to sign this 5-page form, we can do another one, PSRA. Well, it's not here. Well, chance to show you. If you don't have something in your transaction, just add it from the library of the California Association of Realtors. Property, well, it's already on there. Oh, you have to type out the whole thing. So if they don't want to sign that 5-page form, there's a shorter one. That's 2 pages. Well, 3 pages. It still explains everything, but it's only good for 30 days. Where does it say that? Yeah, not to exceed 30 days. So it's a short-term agreement for a buyer. And if the buyer buys a property with another agent, guess what? They're still on the hook with you. So that's the whole point behind this. We want some kind of commitment with a buyer before we show them property. Why are you going to spend 3 months showing that many homes to a buyer when they have no commitment to you? You're wasting your time. So it's one of the good things that came out of this whole change in the past year. So you have 2 options. I'd recommend the 3-month, or you can just say, you know what, let's compromise. Let's do a 30-day. But still, I'm making a commitment to you. You make a commitment to me. That's what this is saying. Any questions? From Zoom? Anybody? No.
Kevin, what's the name of that form?
This one, the 30-day.
Yes.
Property showing and representation agreement, PSRA. So for use when a prospective buyer for up to 3 open house or property only. So there's a limit. What properties am I going to show them? You just have to list them here.
Thank you.
All right. All right, we did it. That's the
Great.
Friday training, and thank you for your time. Have an awesome weekend. All right, take care. Thank you.